June 2001. Utah's canyonlands shimmered like a furnace. Heat rolled off the mesas in silver waves, and every horizon looked like a mirage pretending to be a road. Somewhere along Highway 95, a faded red Honda Civic pushed south toward the Height Crossing Bridge. Inside were Emily Carter, 22, a geology major who kept maps laminated in plastic; Noah Lewis, 23, a construction apprentice with an easy laugh and a habit of overpacking snacks; and Benji Morales, 21, film student, dreamer, and self-appointed documentarian of everything. They'd promised their families a short trip, 3 days camping near the reservoir, a farewell adventure before real life took over. No heroics, Emily's mother had said. Stay on the main roads. Emily smiled through the driver's side window. It's just the desert, Mom. The safest danger there is. She was wrong about that. June 2001. Utah's canyonlands shimmered like a furnace. Heat rolled off the mesas in silver waves, and every horizon looked like a mirage pretending to be a road. Somewhere along Highway 95, a faded red Honda Civic pushed south toward the Height Crossing Bridge. Inside were Emily Carter, 22, a geology major who kept maps laminated in plastic; Noah Lewis, 23, a construction apprentice with an easy laugh and a habit of overpacking snacks; and Benji Morales, 21, film student, dreamer, and self-appointed documentarian of everything. They'd promised their families a short trip, 3 days camping near the reservoir, a farewell adventure before real life took over. No heroics, Emily's mother had said. Stay on the main roads. June 2001. Utah's canyonlands shimmered like a furnace. Heat rolled off the mesas in silver waves, and every horizon looked like a mirage pretending to be a road. Somewhere along Highway 95, a faded red Honda Civic pushed south toward the Height Crossing Bridge. Inside were Emily Carter, 22, a geology major who kept maps laminated in plastic; Noah Lewis, 23, a construction apprentice with an easy laugh and a habit of overpacking snacks; and Benji Morales, 21, film student, dreamer, and self-appointed documentarian of everything. They'd promised their families a short trip, 3 days camping near the reservoir, a farewell adventure before real life took over. No heroics, Emily's mother had said. Stay on the main roads. Emily smiled through the driver's side window. It's just the desert, Mom. The safest danger there is. She was wrong about that. Their itinerary read like something written by optimism itself. Friday a.m., drive to Moab. Friday p.m., fuel at Height Marina, camp near shore. Saturday, film sunrise for Benji's student project. Sunday, return to Salt Lake City. At 2:17 p.m. on June 8, they appeared on security footage at a Moab gas station. Noah pumped fuel. Emily folded a paper map across the windshield. Benji danced with his camera on record. The clerk remembered them later. They looked like the start of a road trip commercial. By 5:42 p.m., they crossed the Ranger Gate at Height Marina, signing the visitor ledger. Ranger Cal Porter still had the page years later. 3 kids, 2 tents, 1 Civic. Destination, Cove Camping, polite as church mice. They asked about night swimming. Porter warned them, stay near the rocks. The lake drops fast. Emily wrote in her journal that evening, water so calm it looks solid. Sunday night came and went with no calls home. Monday morning, when Emily didn't text her roommate, it raised an eyebrow, not an alarm. By Tuesday evening, Noah's foreman phoned his parents. By Wednesday afternoon, both families were in the ranger office holding photos. At 3:10 p.m., Porter radioed from the overlook above the reservoir. Found tire tracks heading down to old service ramp, end abruptly at waterline. The Civic's pattern, Goodyear Regatta 2s, matched Emily's purchase receipt. But there was no sign of braking, no scattered gear, no oil slick. The lake was at record height. The drop-off beneath the ramp was nearly 90 feet. Divers went in the next morning. Visibility under 2 feet, silt thick as milk. They followed the ramp edge until their guide ropes vanished into darkness. No contact, no debris. The Civic might as well have driven straight into another world. The Miller family disappeared on a Sunday, September 9th, 1985, the last day anyone saw Tom and Laura Miller and their 2 children, Ben, 9, and Sophie, 6. They'd packed their sky blue camper and left their home in Salem for a weekend trip in Oregon's Willamette National Forest. A short getaway before school started. Nothing unusual. They'd been to the same campground dozens of times. At 6:47 a.m., a neighbor watched their camper roll down Pine Street. Tom waved. The family dog barked from the back seat. By noon, they'd stopped for gas near Detroit Lake. The attendant remembered them clearly. He was joking about how much gas that old Dodge drank, the man told reporters later. The kids were eating peanut butter sandwiches in the back. They looked happy. That was the last verified sighting. When Tom didn't show up for work on Tuesday, his employer called Laura's sister, Evelyn Marsh. Evelyn said she wasn't worried at first. They often stayed an extra day. But by Wednesday morning, when the school reported both children absent, she called the sheriff. At 11:05 a.m., the Marion County Sheriff's Office issued a missing persons alert for 4 individuals and 1 vehicle, a 1978 Dodge camper, license plate 6F2147. Rangers and volunteers fanned out across the forest's 1.6 million acres. Helicopters swept the logging roads. Search dogs tracked scent along 2 popular trails before losing it near French Creek Road. They found tire impressions leading off a gravel pullout, deep grooves that ended at a washout edge. No camper, no debris, no oil spill, nothing. Just forest. The search went on for 12 days. Weather turned on the 4th. Rain hammered the ridges, washing away footprints. By day 6, the creek overflowed, collapsing the banks. Rangers said the forest reset itself. Helicopters flew until visibility dropped to 0. Volunteers trudged through waist-deep mud, calling names that never echoed back. By the end of September, the official search was scaled down. The terrain eats evidence, one deputy said. If that camper went into a ravine, it could be buried under 30 feet of mud by now. Evelyn refused to accept it. She kept the porch light on every night. For years, she drove the back roads alone on weekends, leaving notes under rocks, ribbons tied to branches. It felt like talking to ghosts, she said later, but at least it was talking. As months turned to years, the Miller disappearance became one of Oregon's coldest cases. The file filled 2 binders: sightings, tips, rumors. One claimed the family had fled debts. Another blamed a serial drifter operating in the 1980s. Nothing stuck. Every lead ended in the same silence that swallowed them. In 1988, 3 hikers reported finding a license plate fragment deep in the forest. The numbers didn't match. In 1991, a flood unearthed a child's shoe near the same region. Wrong size. Each discovery reignited the case briefly, then dimmed again. The pattern became cruelly familiar, a glimmer of hope, followed by nothing. Evelyn, by then 70, told a reporter, "It's the not knowing that ages you fastest." Time passed. The forest healed itself again. Trails shifted. Logging routes closed. People stopped asking. Then, in October 2023, 2 hunters from Eugene, Michael Torres and Dean Cooper, were tracking elk near an uncharted stretch of forest north of Marion Forks, about 5 miles from the old French Creek trailhead. It was rust country, accessible only by foot. They followed fresh tracks up a narrow ridge, crossed a stream, and found themselves in an area they didn't recognize. Around midday, Michael noticed something glinting between trees, dull silver under moss. At first, he thought it was an old water tank, but when he brushed away the vines, the shape revealed itself. The curve of a roof, windows darkened by dirt. A camper, wedged sideways against the slope, crushed in front, but mostly intact. They climbed closer. The side door hung open, hinges rusted to nothing. Inside, it was a frozen moment from another century. Plates still in a cupboard, a Polaroid camera on the table, a pair of children's shoes under the bench seat. Dean stepped back, whispering, "Mike, this is a family camper." Michael noticed a sticker on the rear window, faint but visible through grime. A yellow smiley face and the words, "Miller Family Adventures, 1985. He staggered backward. "No way," he said. They took GPS coordinates, snapped photos, and hiked out to get a signal. By nightfall, the Marion County Sheriff's Office had a team en route. When search crews returned the next morning, they found what nature had hidden for 38 years. The camper had fallen roughly 80 feet off a forgotten service road, landing in a natural depression shielded by fallen trees. Flood sediment and moss sealed it in like a tomb. Only drought and time had finally peeled it open again. Inside, investigators found partial remains consistent with 2 adults and 2 children. Objects were scattered, but some were untouched. A thermos still held traces of instant coffee. A book titled Pacific Northwest Wildlife lay open on the counter. Laura's handwriting filled the margins with notes about birds. Beneath the front seat, a Polaroid pack held a single undeveloped photograph. The chemicals were long dead, but the image outline showed 4 faint shapes standing beside a camper, smiling at the forest behind them. Ortega wasn't here this time. He'd retired. But one of his trainees, now Detective Renee Carter, led the scene. She told reporters later, "It was like the forest had been keeping them safe until it was ready to let them go." The forensics team spent a week cataloging. They found car keys, a broken wristwatch, tire tread patterns matched those found near the old pullout in 1985. Everything aligned perfectly, down to the smallest thread. When Evelyn received the call, she was 90. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I knew they'd wait for me," she said. "I just didn't think they'd wait this long." That winter, when the remains were confirmed, Oregon newspapers ran the headline, "The Forest Remembers." But what investigators would uncover inside that camper, the items preserved against time, told a quieter, more human story than any headline could hold. Part 2. When daylight broke over the ridge, mist was still trapped between the firs like breath that didn't want to leave. Deputies strung yellow tape around the clearing, though it felt almost ceremonial. No one expected intrusions this deep into the forest. Detective Renee Carter, the air was sharp with pine and rust. The ground still held the impression of the hunter's boots. The first human marks there in decades. The vehicle sat tilted at a 20-degree angle, front crushed against rock, back wheels half buried in moss and silt. The door hung open like a wound. They began by photographing every surface before lifting a single object. Each item told part of a story. How quickly the crash must have come, how still the years that followed had been. The interior was coated with soil and leaves, but nothing appeared looted. In one drawer, they found crayons still bright under grime, a notebook with arithmetic problems in a child's handwriting, a grocery list written in Laura's neat cursive, milk, bread, batteries, film. It was dated September 7th, 1985. Near the small kitchenette lay a metal thermos. When a technician twisted it open, the faint smell of coffee and thyme is everything inside was ordinary, heartbreakingly so. A half-burned candle, A folded map of the Willamette Forest, marked with tiny red circles, one around French Creek Road. The ink had bled slightly, like a fingerprint pressed into paper. Carter ducked under the doorway, careful not to disturb the fallen debris. Her flashlight beam caught something on the floor near the driver's seat, a child's backpack. The cartoon character faded, almost to nothing. Inside was a small collection of rocks, a pencil stub, and a folded Polaroid of the family in front of their house. Everyone smiling. The edges had fused together from moisture, but their faces were visible, as if waiting to be recognized. The coroner's team worked quietly, their movements practiced, reverent. The skeletal remains were found where the crash logic suggested. Tom behind the wheel, Laura beside him, the children in the back bunk, seatbelts still clasped. It looked like they'd settled into sleep before the world ended. Cause of death was listed later as blunt trauma, instantaneous. No sign of struggle, no indication of fire. Just an impossible accident that geography hid too well. Outside, rain began again, soft but steady. Drops pattered through the trees, carrying the smell of earth and oil. A deputy turned off the generator to listen. The forest made its own kind of sound, a hush that was neither sorrow nor peace, but something older, deeper. Carter took a breath and said quietly, "Let's get them out." By afternoon, the remains and artifacts were secured in labeled containers. Each item was logged with precision. The Polaroid camera, the keys, a small gold bracelet engraved Sophie, Tom's wristwatch still showing 9:14, Laura's wedding ring intact. When they lifted the ring, sunlight hit it just right. The next day, forensic vehicles wound their way back through Forest Service roads toward Salem. Reporters had already gathered outside the sheriff's office. The story breaking across local radio. Hunters discover missing 1985 family in Oregon forest. Some listeners pulled over on highways to cry. Others called in to share memories. How they'd joined the volunteer search. How they'd kept the family's Christmas cards from that last year pinned on a fridge out of guilt for forgetting. The Millers had become more than victims. They were part of the landscape's folklore. Now they were real again. Forensic analysis began immediately. The crash reconstruction showed that Tom likely missed a sharp bend at night. Tire tracks ended just feet from where erosion had. Investigators estimated the camper had plunged nearly 80 feet, the impact buried instantly by mudslide. Within a single winter, the forest had grown over the site, sealing it until the drought of 2023 stripped away the covering soil. Time, patient and blind, had delivered its confession. Inside the lab, one discovery stood out. The Polaroid cartridge found under the seat still held a half-exposed film sheet. Against all odds, faint images emerged when scanned under infrared light, blurred figures around a campfire, the glow of lanterns, the silhouette of trees. The timestamp on the border read September 9th, 85, 7:42 p.m. It was the last photograph they ever took. Carter stared at the digital reconstruction until her eyes blurred. "They made it," she murmured. "They were together. They were happy." DNA confirmed identities within weeks. The sheriff's department contacted Evelyn Marsh first. She was too frail to track. When Carter read the confirmation aloud, Evelyn smiled through the screen. "You did it," she said softly. "You found my family's way back home." The announcement made national news. A headline in the Oregonian read, "Found after 38 years, family's final camp returns from forest." Reporters revisited archived footage from 1985, grainy images of volunteers combing the woods. Many of those searchers were gone now, but their children watched the story unfold on television. Stunned, that something their parents once searched for had finally surfaced in their own lifetime. The remains were released to the family in early December. A small memorial service was held in Salem's Pioneer Cemetery. 4 caskets side by side, each draped in simple. Snow fell in thin sheets during the service, gathering on coats and hair. Evelyn, bundled in a blanket, sat in the front row. When the minister spoke of faith and patience, she whispered, "And of maps we couldn't read." After the funeral, Carter drove alone to the recovery site. The forest road was half frozen, the trail slick with ice. She parked where the slope began and walked the last stretch. In the clearing, the cleanup crews had left little trace, just tire marks fading into moss. She crouched by the edge, brushing aside leaves until her hand found metal, the camper's side mirror, broken off during extraction. She held it up, seeing her own reflection warped in its curve. "You're free now," she said quietly, and placed it back on the ground. Back in Salem, she kept only the Polaroid and Laura's ring. The rest she donated to the Oregon Historical Society, requesting that the display focus not on tragedy, but on endurance. When asked why, she said, "The forest didn't hide them to be cruel. It kept them safe until we learned to look again." That spring, Carter was promoted to lieutenant, though she rarely mentioned the case anymore. Colleagues said she sometimes paused by the evidence locker, let them rest where they fell, she'd said. The forest agreed, covering the scar with wildflowers and ferns. In July 2024, the county erected a small roadside sign near French Creek Road. It read simply, "In memory of the Miller family, 1985, found 2023. Beneath it, a line from Laura's journal. "Every path leads home if you give it enough years." When locals drive past, they often honk once, a tradition started by truckers who remembered the missing posters from the 80s. On still mornings, the echo rolls through the trees like a heartbeat. Some say it sounds like an engine turning over after a long sleep. For Carter, it meant closure. For the winter returned, colder than anyone remembered. Snow fell across the Cascades, burying the ridges and the creek beds that had once hidden the Millers. It was almost poetic, Carter thought, nature covering them again, but this time with gentleness instead of silence. She sat at her desk one evening, staring at the final report draft. The words felt too clinical for what the forest had given back. Case closed didn't seem right. Case completed felt closer. She closed the file and looked at the Polaroid copy pinned to the wall. The 4 figures around that faint campfire, almost shapeless, like memories refusing to fade. Every time she looked at it, she thought of warmth, laughter, the smell of pine smoke. The way a family can vanish and still somehow remain alive in an image that never developed fully. In Salem, Evelyn passed away quietly in her sleep 2 months after the funeral. On her nightstand were 2 objects, Laura's wedding ring and a small card that read, "They came home." At her memorial, Carter spoke briefly. She waited 38 years and never stopped believing the forest would tell the truth. It finally did. The items Evelyn had donated were moved into permanent exhibition in Portland State Museum by the following summer. The display, titled "The Miller's Road, A Family Lost and Found," stood behind glass, arranged exactly as they'd been discovered. The map with red circles, the thermos, the Polaroid camera, the keys, and that small child's backpack. Visitors would stand there for long minutes, whispering softly to each other. Some cried quietly, without knowing why. It wasn't just the tragedy. It was the patience, the passage of time, the idea that something could sleep for nearly 4 decades before being seen again. School groups came through often. Teachers told students the story as a lesson in geography, history, even hope. One little girl, pointing at the crayon pack in the case, asked, "Did she finish her picture?" The teacher hesitated before saying, "Maybe she finished it somewhere else." In the spring of 2025, Carter drove back to the site again, though officially it wasn't part of any case anymore. She parked at the road's edge, the same bend Tom Miller had missed that night in 1985. The guardrail installed after the discovery gleamed silver in the sunlight. She stood there a long time, listening. No cars, just wind through trees, the rhythmic sound of branches creaking. Then, faintly, a metallic rattle. Maybe the loose chain of the sign down the road, maybe imagination. She walked down the slope carefully, boots crunching on frost. The spot where the camper had rested was marked only by a darker patch of soil, a slight dip in the earth. She knelt, brushed her hand over the ground, and whispered, "You're free now." A small blue jay landed nearby, cocked its head, and flew off again. The air smelled of pine and cold water. That night, she stayed in a motel near Detroit Lake, the same place volunteers had once gathered during the 1985 search. The owner was new but had heard the story from his father. "My dad used to say the forest doesn't hide things, it protects them until we're ready to understand," he told her. Carter smiled, sipping coffee gone cold. He was right. Weeks later, a local journalist produced a short documentary about the case. The opening scene was the recovered Polaroid slowly developing on screen. Faint shapes brightening under soft light. A narrator said, "For 38 years, the forest kept a secret." When it finally spoke, it didn't shout, it whispered. The film aired statewide, becoming one of Oregon Public Broadcasting's most watched segments that year. People wrote letters to the station, saying the story reminded them to call family, to visit graves, to drive slower on mountain roads. At the end of the documentary, Carter's voice was heard off camera. It wasn't just about finding them. It was about realizing they'd never been lost to the forest. They were part of it. Her words lingered over the closing shot of trees swaying in late summer light. In 2026, a trailhead near Marion Forks was renamed Miller's Crossing in their honor. Hikers now begin there, following a loop that winds past rivers and slopes once unreachable. A wooden sign at the start reads, "Dedicated to those who wander and never return." And to those who keep. Visitors leave small tokens, stones painted with family names, letters folded under bark, photos of loved ones who vanished elsewhere. The site has become something more than memorial. It's a promise to remember. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline, a father and daughter paused by the sign. The girl pointed at the inscription and asked, "Did they ever find their way home?" The father nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "They just took the long road." Back in Salem, Carter transferred to a teaching role at the academy. Her lectures on missing person cases always began the same way, with silence. She'd wait a full minute before speaking, letting the quiet fill the room like forest air. Then she'd say, "Every search starts in silence. But silence isn't empty. It's holding the answers we haven't learned how to." The Miller story stayed with her. She kept a copy of Laura's map folded inside her notebook. The red circles had faded almost completely, but she traced them with her thumb sometimes before class, as if touching a heartbeat through paper. It reminded her that the job wasn't about finding tragedy. It was about returning memory. Years later, hikers still talk about seeing a faint glow near the bend where the camper fell. A shimmer of light just before dawn, like headlights buried under moss. Forest rangers dismiss it as reflection from dew or lightning far off over the Cascades. But some believe it's the Millers, still traveling their favorite road, the one they never finished. On quiet nights, when the wind moves right, people say you can hear children laughing faintly through the trees, followed by the low hum of an engine turning over once more, before fading back into stillness. At the museum, a guard making rounds one evening found a note left near the display case. It was written on lined paper in a child's uneven handwriting. "Thank you for waiting for them. No one ever claimed it." The Polaroid still hangs there, illuminated under glass. The image remains imperfect, ghostly figures blurred by time. But under the right light, when visitors tilt their heads just so, they swear they can see motion. Not haunting, just a family, mid-laughter, frozen before the flash went off. Forever on their last evening together, the forest rising behind them like a curtain waiting to close. Carter visited the outside. The city buzzed faintly, distant and unaware. Above the trees, stars began to show through thin clouds, the same constellations that had guided the Millers home after nearly 4 decades beneath the soil. Somewhere out in those forests, wind slid through the pines and rattled loose a chain on a memorial sign. It jingled softly, like keys finding each other again. But the desert remained unchanged. When the crowds left and the sun sank, wind carried through the canyons again, repeating its soft syllables. Rangers sometimes thought they heard words in it, short, calm, instructive, like someone guiding a class. Here, look closer, learn the pattern. Renee returned one last time in late summer, alone. She sat by the canyon until dusk, notebook on her knees. The carvings glowed pale pink. The spiral shimmered faintly in the dying light. She closed her eyes and imagined Ellen somewhere within the stone. Not trapped, not lost, simply absorbed by the place she loved enough to teach forever. The air moved gently around her, warm and dry. It felt almost like breath. As night fell, stars emerged, bright and sharp. The constellations overhead mirrored the map on the ground perfectly, line for line. She realized then that Ellen's final act hadn't been survival. It had been continuity, the kind teachers understand instinctively, knowledge that keeps teaching itself long after the voice is gone. Wind brushed her cheek like a whisper, lesson complete. She smiled, packed her notebook, and started back down the trail. Behind her, the carved word water caught the moonlight and glowed one last time, blue, steady, eternal, before fading into the quiet heart of the desert.